What if I told you that I destroyed the only woman who ever tried to save me, and in doing so I almost lost the daughters I never even knew I had? Alexander Ward's voice cracked as he whispered the confession into the dark. His hands trembled, not from fear of enemies in boardrooms or the crushing weight of lawsuits, but from the raw memory of two little girls looking at him with eyes that mirrored his own and accusing him of ruining their lives. For years he thought betrayal came from competitors, rivals, men in suits plotting behind closed doors. But the real betrayal was his own blindness, his arrogance, his refusal to see the truth when it was right in front of him. Now every heartbeat carried both guilt and desperation because he knew redemption wasn't guaranteed. It had to be earned one painful choice at a time. And if you stay with me, you will witness the shocking moment when Alex is forced to choose between protecting his empire or protecting his family, knowing that whichever path he takes his life will never be the same again. Alexander Ward's mornings were normally built on precision. By 8 o'clock sharp, he was usually seated in the glass corner office of Ward Tower, staring down at the skyline of New York City with his coffee in hand and a line of assistants feeding him updates. But that morning, with his empire faltering from a string of disastrous deals, the air already felt different, thick, heavy, almost waiting for something to break. He didn't know it yet, but the blow was coming from the last place he would have imagined. The double doors to his office cracked open, and instead of another executive or lawyer, two small figures stepped inside. Twin girls no more than 7, clutching each other's hands so tightly their knuckles had turned white. Their clothes were mismatched, their shoes scuffed, but their eyes, wide sharp, unflinching, locked on Alex. One of them, the braver of the two, stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but carried enough weight to slice through the sterile perfection of his office. "Because of you," she said, "our mommy's in court." The room fell silent. Alex froze, tablets still glowing with reports he hadn't cared to read. His first thought was that this was some mistake, maybe a cruel prank. But the words lodged in his chest, echoing with a finality that shook him. He looked at them more closely, the set of their jaw, the way their eyes narrowed. His breath caught. There was something there, something disturbingly familiar. Who is your mother?" he managed. "Sarah Mitchell," the girl said. And just like that, the name ripped open a memory he had buried long ago. Sarah, the quiet woman who used to work nights as a gatekeeper in one of his warehouses. She had vanished years ago, fired under a cloud of suspicion. He hadn't thought about her in years until now. The twins reached into a battered backpack and pulled out a notebook bound in cracked leather. They placed it on his desk, the sound small but deafening in the pristine silence. "She wanted you to have this," the quieter girl whispered. Alex opened the diary with stiff fingers, his pulse hammering harder with each line. At first it was mundane lists of bills, scraps of poetry notes to her daughters. But then he found the entry that made his throat tighten, a description of how she had discovered that the plant supervisor at his company was accepting bribes from competitors and stealing raw materials. She had planned to go directly to him with the evidence. But before she could, she was framed for theft by that same supervisor. Alex's eyes darted across the pages, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He remembered the reports. He remembered signing off on her termination without question. He had trusted his management team. He had never once considered Sarah might be innocent. The diary went further. She had written a letter to him once, begging him to listen, begging for a chance to explain. But she had torn it to shreds, believing he would never see her as more than a disposable worker. The pieces were taped to one-page, jagged fragments that formed sentences just clear enough to pierce him. "Please don't believe them. I didn't steal." He shut the diary with shaking hands. His chest tightened, an unfamiliar weight settling over him. For the first time in years, Alexander Ward, master of control, felt powerless. The girls were watching him carefully, their eyes flickering with something between fear and fury. Finally, the bolder one spoke again. "She didn't do what they said. She only stole milk and medicine because we were sick. She said it was your fault." Alex leaned back in his leather chair, his mind spinning. His empire was already tottering from competitors undermining his projects, from failures he couldn't quite explain. And now staring him in the face was the truth the rot had begun years ago in his own house, when he chose to believe a liar over an honest woman. And worse, he had condemned her children to this life of desperation. His children. The thought slipped in before he could stop it. He looked again at their faces, the familiar curve of the jawline. He nearly lost his breath. The girls didn't want his sympathy, they wanted answers. But before he could form words, the older one suddenly burst out, her voice cracking. "She said you were our father." The words shattered him more than any failed deal, more than any headline about his empire collapsing. His fatherhood, hidden, denied, buried by ignorance and pride, was standing in front of him in two fragile bodies who didn't trust him enough to shed their tears. That night they stayed in his penthouse, not out of comfort, but necessity. He tried to offer them food, but they sat stiff and silent on the couch, too wary to eat. Later, when the apartment fell quiet, Alex heard the faint sound of crying. He followed it down the hall and found the bathroom door locked. His chest tightened. "Chloe," he called gently, realizing he now knew her name. "Please open the door." No, the girl's voice shook with fear. "You'll send us away. You'll leave us like you left her." Alex pressed his forehead to the door. For a long moment, he didn't know what to say. He had never begged in his life, but now every part of him was begging for the chance to change, to prove himself. "Listen to me," he said finally, voice breaking in a way that terrified him. "I was wrong. I should have listened. I should have protected her. I didn't. But I will protect you. I will never walk away from you. Never." Silence. Then the faint click of the lock. Chloe opened the door just a crack, eyes red and swollen. Alex didn't hesitate. He pushed the door open, knelt and wrapped her trembling body into his arms. She fought him for a second, then collapsed against his chest. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Ward felt the true weight of responsibility, a weight heavier than any empire, any fortune, any skyscraper. As he carried Chloe back to bed, Sophie stirred and blinked up at him. In her sleepy whisper, she asked, "Are you really our dad?" His throat closed, but he forced the words out. "Yes. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it." He sat between their beds until dawn, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling as the storm of his past crashed into the fragile hope of a future. He knew this was only the beginning. The reckoning was coming, not just with his enemies, not just with his company, but with himself. Can a man like Alex Ward really change when faced with the burden of his past? The morning after that sleepless night arrived not with clarity, but with heavier questions. Alexander Ward stood in the kitchen of his penthouse, staring at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. Behind him, the two girls sat at the counter, silent and wary, watching every move he made, as if expecting him to vanish at any second. His empire had always been about commanding rooms, closing deals, bending people to his will. But here, faced with two daughters he had never known, he felt like a man stripped bare. He set a plate of toast in front of them, though he doubted either would eat. Sophie, the gentler of the two, reached for a piece out of politeness. Chloe, still stiff with anger, didn't touch it. Alex swallowed hard, a quiet panic in his chest. He could face corporate enemies, ruthless competitors, even the press circling like vultures. But two little girls who didn't believe in him, that was a battlefield he had never trained for. Later that morning, his phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Laura Bennett, the social worker assigned to the twins. Her voice was steady, professional. "Mr. Ward, the children need therapy immediately. They've been through years of instability, and last night only proved their fear of abandonment runs deep. I'm scheduling sessions with Dr. Emily Harper. She's one of the best child psychologists in New York." "Do you think therapy will be enough?" Alex asked, pacing across the marble floor, glancing toward the hallway where the girls played silently with toys they barely touched. "No," Dr. Bennett replied simply. "Therapy can guide them. But what they need most is consistency, love, and that has to come from you." The word love sat like a weight on his tongue, unfamiliar and heavy. He had built towers, empires, legacies, but could he build trust with two broken hearts? He didn't have time to dwell. That afternoon, a woman in her late 50s knocked on his door. She introduced herself with calm authority. "Margaret Hayes, you need a nanny. I don't scare easily." Alex, desperate for stability, hired her on the spot. Maggie, as she insisted they call her, knelt down to the girls' level and looked them straight in the eyes. "I'm here to help your dad. I'm not your mom, and I'm not pretending to be. I'll cook, I'll clean, and I'll make sure you eat your vegetables. The rest is up to you." For the first time, Alex saw a flicker of a smile cross Chloe's face. But peace didn't last. The following day, Dr. Harper met the girls. Afterwards, she called Alex privately. Her words landed like a hammer. "Chloe told me something important. She believes her mother lost everything because of you. She said you fired Sarah when she was pregnant. That's the moment she said their lives fell apart." Alex felt his stomach twist. He stormed into Ward Tower that night, tearing through archived employee files until he found Sarah Mitchell's record. Terminated March 2018, the reason budget realignment. But stapled to the file was a medical note dated just days earlier. Request for pregnancy-related health coverage. His chest tightened. She had been pregnant with Chloe and Sophie when he cast her out. The guilt gnawed at him as he drove to Rikers Island prison. The guards led him into a sterile room with glass separating him from Sarah. She looked thinner, harder, but her eyes still burned with fire. "You came," she said flatly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Alex asked, his voice low, cracking under the weight of too many regrets. "Would it have mattered?" she shot back. "You wouldn't even take my calls. Your secretary said you didn't have time to talk to cleaning staff. I didn't know you were pregnant." Sarah leaned back and laughed, bitter and sharp. "And if you had known, you would have written a check to make me disappear. That's who you were." Alex's throat tightened. She wasn't wrong. He thought of the diary, the torn letter, the evidence she had wanted to share. And he thought of Chloe locking herself in the bathroom, convinced he would abandon her like he abandoned her mother. "You don't understand," Sarah said, her voice breaking for the first time. "I lost everything. My job, my health insurance. I worked 3 jobs, slept barely at all. And when Sophie got sick, I made mistakes. But I never stopped being their mother." Alex pressed his hand to the glass. "They're safe now. With me." Sarah's eyes softened, but only slightly. "Safe doesn't mean they trust you. That's something you'll have to earn." He left the prison that night, hollowed out, haunted by her words. He returned home to find Sophie asleep on the couch, her small hand clutching the hem of his suit jacket, as if she was afraid he'd vanish if she let go. But the storm wasn't done with him. The next morning, his attorney, Richard Coleman, arrived at Ward Tower with grim news. "The Department of Labor is opening an investigation into your company. Unsafe working conditions, unfair terminations. Sarah Mitchell's case is front and center." Alex closed his eyes, his pulse spiking. "How bad is it?" Bad, Richard said. "You're facing lawsuits, media scrutiny, and here's the twist. The attorney leading the charge is Daniel Ward." Alex froze. What? Richard hesitated. "He says he's your brother." The words detonated inside Alex's chest. He had grown up believing he was an only child. He stared out of the tower's glass walls, watching the city move below him, and for the first time the skyline looked less like power and more like a prison of his own making. Hours later, the conference room door opened. A man walked in, sharp suit, briefcase in hand, his jaw set with cold determination. He looked like a ghost Alex should have recognized. "I'm the one they gave up," the man said. "The child they couldn't afford to keep. They kept you." Alex's throat went dry. I didn't know." "You didn't care to know," Daniel snapped. "And now I'm representing the woman you destroyed, the workers you neglected. Karma's here, Alex, and it's right on schedule." The two brothers locked eyes across the polished mahogany table, strangers bound by blood, enemies bound by betrayal. Alex's empire was crumbling, but the real collapse was happening inside him. The past he had ignored was back, demanding payment, and this time he couldn't buy his way out. Does Alex Ward deserve forgiveness from Sarah and the girls he abandoned, or is redemption impossible for a man with so much blood on his hands? Alexander Ward had always believed that power came from numbers on a balance sheet, from towers rising above the skyline, from the way entire boardrooms grew silent when he walked in. But now, as weeks bled into months, he discovered that power was something far quieter. It was in the way Chloe's laughter filled his modest new home, in the way Sophie slipped her small hand into his without hesitation, in the way silence no longer felt like emptiness, but peace. After the confrontation with Daniel, after the lawsuits and the headlines, Alex made a choice that shocked everyone who once called him untouchable. He sold his penthouse overlooking Central Park, let go of the luxury cars, and stepped away from the glittering world of Ward Global. Instead, he moved the girls into a modest 2-story house in Queens. The stairs creaked, the paint peeled in corners, and the lawn begged for attention. But it was real, it was theirs. And for the first time in his life, Alex wasn't building for prestige. He was building for love. Every morning began with burnt toast or unevenly scrambled eggs, Sophie's giggles at his failed attempts echoing through the kitchen. Every evening ended with Chloe cautiously leaning closer during story time, until one night she finally rested her head on his shoulder. That single gesture, simple as it was, nearly undid him. He understood then that trust wasn't handed over. It was earned moment by moment, choice by choice. Still, the past refused to loosen its grip entirely. Sarah's trial loomed over them like a storm cloud. The night before the sentencing, Alex found Chloe missing from her bed. Panic rose like fire in his chest as he searched the neighborhood, calling her name until his throat was raw. He finally found her in the shadow of their old apartment building, sitting on the cold floor, clutching a photograph of her mother. "I thought you'd forget us if you lose everything," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks, just like before. Alex knelt before her, his heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. "Chloe, listen to me. I've already lost everything that doesn't matter. The only thing I'll never let go of is you and Sophie. I'd give up the world again if it meant keeping you safe." For the first time, she believed him. She threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his chest, and Alex held her as if she were the only anchor keeping him steady. The next day in court, the air was thick with judgment. Sarah stood in her orange prison uniform, her hands trembling, but her chin lifted high. When the judge asked if anyone wished to speak on her behalf, Alex rose. His voice shook but carried the weight of truth. "Your Honor, I once believed success meant never admitting weakness. I was wrong. Sarah Mitchell was framed by men I trusted. I failed her when she needed me most. But she never stopped being a mother to Chloe and Sophie. If justice is meant to heal, then let her heal with them." The courtroom was silent. Then unexpectedly, Chloe stood up too. Her voice was small but unflinching. "Please don't take my mom forever. She's all we had until Daddy came back." The gallery gasped, and for a long moment the judge stared at the little girl who had spoken more truth in a sentence than any lawyer could have in hours. Finally, the gavel struck. 6 years with eligibility for parole in 3. It wasn't freedom, but it was hope. As Sarah was led away, she locked eyes with Alex. No words were spoken, but the gratitude was there, the fragile truce forming between them. The girls clung to him as they left the courtroom, not in fear this time, but in a quiet, newfound certainty. Life settled into something new. Alex worked on small housing projects, insisting on fair pay, safety standards, and dignity for every worker. Daniel visited, sometimes no longer with hostility, but with the awkward steps of a brother trying to reconcile decades of silence. The girls adored him, and in their laughter, the distance between the brothers began to fade. At night, therapy sessions turned into family traditions. The girls drew pictures of their dreams, Chloe sketching a home with both parents in the yard, Sophie doodling, Alex cooking spaghetti with them at the table. Dr. Harper's words echoed in Alex's mind. "You're becoming their safe place." That's something money can't buy. Months later, on the anniversary of the day the twins had first walked into his office, Alex surprised them with a scrapbook. On the first page was a clipping about his downfall, the article Sarah had once hidden away. "So we remember where we started," he explained. On the last page, Chloe and Sophie had drawn their family, Alex, the twins, Sarah, Maggie, even Daniel, standing outside their little house, with smiles wide enough to light up the page. Sophie leaned against him, her voice soft. "I like the ending." Alex closed the book, his throat tight, but his heart lighter than it had ever been. "So do I," he whispered. For the first time, Alexander Ward understood that redemption wasn't in the towers he built or the wealth he lost. It was in the simple, stubborn act of showing up every day, choosing love over pride, and proving to 2 little girls that even broken stories could be rewritten into something beautiful. Do you believe people can truly rebuild trust after breaking it? Or are some wounds too deep to heal? If you were Chloe or Sophie, would you give Alex Ward another chance to prove himself as a father? What do you think of this story? Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you loved it, please comment "No Barney 3" below. If you felt neutral, number 2. And if you weren't satisfied, number 1. Tell me where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and drop a heart for this story. See you again in the next emotional journey.